Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show in which we explore the mystery of the human personality through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner. I'm the producer of the show, and before we go any further, I want to introduce our host because I have a question for him, Ian Cron. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, my brother. I'm glad to see, based on your background, it looks like you're still in prison. I'm just wondering when you're getting out.
Yes. Okay, so I have a little family news for you, but before I go there, I want you to tell me a little bit about this right here.
Oh, well, Aura Bora, my new, keep holding it up, keep holding up the product.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Aura Bora, that is my new favorite sparkling drink water, in part because it is the newest, latest, and I mean greatest sparkling drink on the market, created by my son-in-law and daughter. It's already in 370 stores, and it's growing exponentially. That you know what you're holding right there? My retirement.
Tell me. Literally, Ian had no idea I was going to do this. For those of you that are listening to us, Aura Bora, it's a drink, and I just had my first one, and it's amazing, man. I love this.
Wasn't that good? Which one did you have?
0 sugar, 0 calories. Do what?
Which one did you have?
Cactus Rose.
Cactus Rose.
Cactus Rose.
Right. I mean, the stuff is killer, right?
So good. Yeah, it's really good. So congratulations on that. And I have a little bit of news of my own. So Justice, who has been on the show, he's an Enneagram 6. He entered 2 weeks ago now. There's a film festival. It's all around the world, 48-hour film festival. He and his team entered in Nashville, and they won for the whole South.
Wow.
They are up. Yeah, they're up. Today was the final judging, so we don't know the results. But today they're up against LA, and it'll be like it's Paris, Moscow. It's like all over the world.
Wow.
That he'll be going up against next. So pretty amazing. So I'm proud of him. Pretty cool stuff. We have an amazing guest today. I'm pumped about this show.
Yes, I am pumped about this show as well. It was one of the most interesting, delightful, fast-paced, deep conversations I've had in a very, very long time about the Enneagram, particularly about Enneagram Sevens, but well beyond Enneagram Sevens. It's with Blake Mycoskie, the founder of TOMS Shoes, and what a remarkable human being, and what a fantastic conversation.
Amazing. And he has a new company, Madefor, which we talk about a little bit in the show, and some other things that he has done and is doing. But it's such an inspiring, I feel so inspired as a human being. It doesn't matter what number you are, you're going to love this show.
Well, listen,
so,
if he raised
let's get to it.
If he raised the spirits of a 4, everybody hang in there.
All right, so here we go. Blake Mycoskie.
Blake Mycoskie, welcome to Typology.
Thanks for having me on, Ian.
Man, I have looked forward to this conversation for so long, in part because I follow you on Instagram and you're living my life.
Well, I definitely would say I'm living my best life. I've been very blessed, and I get to spend a lot of time with my kids and a lot of time outdoors. And we'll get into why that's so important based on my type. So it'll make more sense in a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to return to this. I want you to give back my life. Just give it back to me. That's all I want to ask. I see you skiing. I see you surfing. I see you horseback riding. I see you rock climbing. Life outdoors is a pretty big theme for you, man.
It is. And it always has been. You know, I grew up being a really competitive tennis player, so I was much more focused in my outdoor activity with one sport. But once I realized I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, I kind of turned that passion for athleticism and being outdoors to a myriad of activities. And one thing I learned from Yvon Chouinard, who's the founder of Patagonia, he really has this great philosophy around activities of you can actually get to about 75% of your proficiency, pretty quickly, and you can enjoy a lot of the things that way versus trying to master something and then you have to give your whole life to it. And so I've kind of went from the mastery philosophy when I was age 10 to say 20 to this idea of I'm really happy being 75% of my potential proficiency in many activities.
Wow, well, I think that's pretty wise. I think that's pretty wise. So let's just jump right in on some Enneagram stuff, okay?
Great.
So when did you first learn about the Enneagram, and how did you determine your type?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. I was actually being interviewed. I don't know. I think it was for Esquire magazine or GQ, one of the men's magazines. And the interviewer came to my ranch here in Jackson Hole. This is 2 years ago. And at the end of the interview, he said, "Oh, by the way, what type are you?" And I was like, "Blood type?" And he's like, "No, Enneagram." And he just Enneagram rolled off his tongue as if like that was the most common thing to know. And I had never heard of the Enneagram. And so I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And then he was like so excited to share with me, as so many people who have benefited from the Enneagram work. And he said, "Well, it's this test and and this this system." And he started explaining it, and I was like, "Okay, well, like I'm interested in that." And he knew through interviewing me that I had a love for Richard Rohr, and so he said, actually. Richard Rohr wrote a book about the Enneagram. And so I would recommend taking the test and getting the book simultaneously. And I did exactly that. I ordered the book on Amazon the next day. I went to the Enneagram Institute and took the test. And like within a week, I was deep into discovering my type. But the interesting thing about my type was I was almost tied between a 7 and a 3. And when I read both of them, that made a lot of sense to me. But what really helped me understand that I was actually a 7 and not a 3 was, from my understanding, the 3, the achiever, their kind of main fear in life was failure. And a lot of the drive that they had was to get status and show other people their success. Where the 7, oftentimes many 7s became entrepreneurs and were very driven, but their main drive was for freedom and their main fear was boredom. And that resonated so much with me. Like I never started any companies to make money or to impress others. It was all that I wanted to have my own freedom. And I also was, deeply afraid of being bored from a vocational standpoint. And so as soon as I had that distinction, I was 100% clear that I was a 7, not a 3.
What does right away, I want to ask you the question, what does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And that the answer to that is so nuanced, I think, and changing. And as my kind of spiritual growth continues to unfold every minute of every day, I think today, I would answer freedom is, especially with regard to my journey as a 7, is really being present, not having the manic need to continue to plan the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But freedom is really being content in the present moment and content with what I have, and what I have is enough. And I personally am enough, because 7s constantly are wanting more. Our kind of chief sin, if you will, is gluttony, and so we are constantly looking to the next thing. I love one of the jokes in one of the books I've read about how 7s go on vacation to plan their next vacation.
Yes.
And I resonate with that. Like literally, it's amazing how oftentimes I've been at the last 2 days of a vacation and like get out my calendar and start planning the next one. So freedom to me is actually not being a slave to the patterns that typically drive a 7, and actually being content with moderation, with constraint, with presence. And that's hard because I love planning stuff. I love doing things. So where I am on my journey right now, and this is why I was so excited to come on your podcast, because I think articulating it out loud helps in your own growth, is where I'm on my journey right now. Is I've recognized what kind of the holy truth is for me. And I'm working every day towards it, but I also am having compassion to myself, knowing that I'm still going to be a planner. I'm still going to be an adventurer, but how can I not use those patterns to distract myself from where I might find a deeper contentment and joy? And that is focusing on enough I have right now and really being present.
So I don't want to be picayune, but as a therapist, I pick up on funny little things in what people say. So you now have used the word presence and present about 8 times in the last 2 sentences. And it's a very important word for 7s. It's probably, what we counsel 7s most to do. And it's rather sad because actually from a spiritual perspective, presence is something that people of every type should be seeking after. It's just more of a challenge in some ways for the monkey mind of the 7 to achieve. Like a 5, like 5s make great Zen monks, actually. Yeah. They have sort of this like onboard equipment, that says, oh, non-attachment, watch this, It's like, here they go. So I want to know now that I know other words, the meaning of other words like freedom in your life, what does presence mean?
Well, I mean, it's so important to me that you're going to laugh, and I'm glad we're on a Zoom call. See if I can move these bracelets. I have literally tattooed it to my wrist. Be present. So that's...
Hey, man, you're taking this crap seriously.
Yeah, this is how committed I am. For anyone who's questioning this. I would say for me, being present is being, another word I will use, and I can go into this, is being aware. And actually being aware of the person who's being aware. So awareness of awareness is a thing that I have found that, can definitely kind of get you into a tailspin if you intellectualize it too much. But if you try to feel into it, and that's what I've been really working on, of like, am I aware right now? And what is my awareness of? And that brings me to a dropping into the present moment in a way that nothing else really has. And so being present is really being aware, and also, like, I would say, focused, but in a wide range of vision. So I think like a 5 can get super focused on something, and so focused that they actually might lose the presence. But what I'm trying to think about when I say I'm really present is I am focused, like say my kids on their music lesson, but I'm focused and present in a way where I'm aware of the whole room and the experience and whether they're enjoying it or not just how well they're doing. And so to me, presence is a kind of a very soft gaze, soft feeling, but very much focused on a singular moment and not living in the future or in the past.
So I have a meditation coach, teacher, and I have I try to have a daily 30 to 40 minute practice. That's my goal. And I probably achieve it maybe, 5 days a week, hopefully 5 days a week. And so, but every week I get new directions. I got to report in on what I'm struggling with and what I got to work on and all this stuff. And he's pretty darn serious about my work. Right. And he'll say to me all the time, I'll say, well, I got really distracted. My mind began to really do this. He goes, Ian, when that happens, when you're doing breath work, let's say, he says, you have to zoom out. You can't just, if your attention is too zoomed in, it becomes so small that you actually lose awareness. So you actually have to zoom out so that you can actually be present in that moment, and not so focused on the breath that you become like you have like an almost arthritic grip on the experience. You know what I'm saying? You just have to sort of let go. And then, so, you sound like you've been reading Buddhists.
I've been reading everything. I mean, I really, I loved, in high school, my favorite class was the philosophy of religion. And then when I went to college, I only lasted 2 years, but I was a philosophy major. And so that really, I think, stoked the fire of curiosity around philosophy and many different, religions. And I feel that there's so much consistency the more that I read across all of them, in terms of what really allows us to grow closer to God and really have that understanding and intimacy that I think so many of us on a spiritual path are seeking. So, I do really love a few of the Buddhist concepts. I'd say the one that I'm probably most recently connected to is that suffering is one of the paths to God. And that, that suffering is not something to be avoided, but to really be welcomed. And to really see suffering as a teacher. And so, I've had some ups and downs over the past few years, and I can definitely point to some of the valleys that I've been in and the most challenging moments as the great catalyst for my growth. And so I really appreciate that that one of the noble truths probably more than any of the others.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, as a 7, because the basic fear of the 7 is to be in pain, and now you have this revelation of the gift of suffering. Like, how has that impacted your life as a 7? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I think this is why it's interesting because, I got exposed to the Enneagram 2 years ago, kind of went fast and deep into it, and then kind of in some ways thought maybe I learned what I needed to learn. And then now I've really come back to it and been just, kind of really focusing on it again, because I have gone through this phase of suffering, and I've kind of come out and realized that, like, maybe for the first time in my life, I didn't run from it. I didn't try to distract myself with a bunch of fun of activities. I actually, experimented with going totally sober, not drinking any beers or wine for a while, so that I could just feel every aspect of the challenges that I was going through. And specifically, I went through divorce. So it was a pretty traumatic start, but an actual beautiful finish. We did this conscious uncoupling program, and now my ex-wife and I are literally best friends. We have so much fun together when we share the kids, and we have a great relationship. But it started with some real suffering and recognizing after 7 years of marriage and lots of therapy that it just wasn't going to work, and that I had to make a change. And so I probably for the first time in my life just felt it and just sat with it and didn't try to distract myself. And so now that I've done that, I'm really curious about how I'm kind of beginning to mature in my 7 type and leaning towards more some 5 tendencies. And I'm really grateful for that. So it's really been a beautiful kind of last year of my life in this journey.
Our listeners have heard me say this before, but there are certain things always worth repeating. And that is that when the Buddha taught that life is suffering, there's so much confusion about what that word means, from people who haven't studied. And literally what it means is the feeling of not at homeness.
Yeah.
It's this feeling
not belonging.
Yeah, this feeling, there's always a feeling of dukkha, this feeling that I'm not at home. I'm not at home in my skin. I'm not at home in the world. And actually, it's also a very Christian idea.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Like we're always looking for some far off country. There's something in us that's longing and yearning and wanting or pushing away, or But actually, I was listening to something right before this interview. It was a podcast called Wild Heart, which is this Buddhist podcast. And the guy was talking about how one of his teachers used to say that essentially one of the statements that characterizes the human condition is, I want. And there's just always, everything begins with, I want, you know? And to me, that's a very seven. It's almost like sevens have this constant feeling of deficiency, like something is missing. Something in the next moment will have something that is deficient in this moment, and I have to race to that moment to find my at-homeness.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting that I want in the sevens. And, one of the things I love about the Enneagram too, is that we can really only know the world from our perspective. And it really helps us understand that we are unique. I mean, if you divide the world by 9, at least 11% of us share our number. And so I can now understand when people don't have that like manic drive for more or wanting that I have. Everyone has a little of it because we have a little bit of all the numbers, but now I can really understand like why a 2 or a 1 just sees my like activity schedule as totally neurotic. And to me, it just seems like the most natural thing in the world to, mountain bike in the morning, play with my kids for 3 hours, climb a mountain, and then, have a big dinner and a bunch of wine that night. Like that to me is like just a normal day. Whereas, other friends of mine like are exhausted about noon. So I think it's really fascinating. But like I have said, is when you really allow this work to like penetrate you and to sit with it, even though it's uncomfortable, like I really realize that like my most content moments are when I'm doing a quiet cup of tea in the morning and a, compassion meditation, or just sitting and watching the birds on the trees here in Jackson. Like I actually think deep down, I enjoy that as much as going surfing. And so that's really starting because I'm allowing that to happen and allowing me to not be a slave to the identity that I created the first 40 years of my life, both to the outside world and internally. And that's when I think the work really starts to transform you. When you're curious about what it would be like to not just be the way you've been.
Yeah, you actually stole a question from me. And that was that people, not so much necessarily in the Enneagram world, although I guess so, but certainly people like Byron Katie, for example, or others, they talk about the importance of doing the work. And whenever they say the word work, it's always capitalized.
You're right.
And so what, if anything, and I think you partially answered it, but I'd like to hear more about it, especially through the lens of the Enneagram. What does the work mean? Because I think it confuses people. They're like,
sure.
What does that mean?
So I'm so glad we're on Zoom. So just below the Be Present tattoo, I only have a few tattoos. It's going to sound like I have them all over my body. I think I have 5 total. But just under that, you can see here, it says, do the work. And
you know what's so funny is that I'm spending this entire podcast interview nailing tattoos that you have that I didn't know about.
Yeah, I love it. But it shows the authenticity of the commitment, right? I actually got the do the work tattoo first, and I got it after I did the Hoffman process 4 years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with Hoffman or not, but it is an incredibly transformative 7-day process that really helps you understand the patterns that you adopted from your parents and how those are causing you to, kind of live a life of maybe not freedom, because instead of consciously making decisions and being the person that God created you to be, you're living out so many of these patterns that you did to either receive the love or the attention of your parents. And so do the work out of the Hoffman process, which I think is exactly what Byron Katie's speaking about, and exactly people who are involved in really using the Enneagram to transform, is, to me, doing the work is, it's one thing to obtain the knowledge, but it's another thing to commit to actually putting the knowledge into practice in your life, and often a very uncomfortable way. And so, doing the work, I'll use a very personal example. So one of the things that I recognized through Hoffman was I received so much attention. I was the first child in my family, and I was also the first grandchild. And my mom did not work at that time. And so her entire life and pride revolved around me, this firstborn. And I experienced that very strongly. And so a lot of good came from that. I developed a lot of confidence in myself. I had a feeling of always being loved and supported. But one thing that happened was I got so used, especially with relationship with women, of being the absolute center of attention, the center of orbit of the world, that created some patterns that were really limiting in the relationships that I could have going forward. And one thing that I uncovered through a deep meditation in Hoffman, which I found to be almost silly and actually seems now embarrassing to share, but it's worth for the pointing out what doing the work means, is I recognized that it was so ingrained in my head that I actually didn't even feel comfortable. It wasn't that I liked being the center of attention, but I actually didn't feel comfortable in group settings until it was established that I was the center of attention. And the best example I've ever been able to give with people at this, and it's so ridiculous, is I love skiing and snowboarding. And so you get on chairlift with 4 strangers every time you ride a lift to the top of the mountain. And I got so good at manipulating the conversation so that within 2 minutes of this ski lift, they would have to ask me what I do for a living, in which I would be able to say, I'm the founder of TOMS, in which they would tell me how great I was. And literally, it was so unconscious. But once I did this work, it was so conscious that now every time I get on a ski lift, I do everything possible to not have them ask that question, and so that I can just connect with them in other ways that don't monopolize the attention or the conversation. And that might seem like a small thing to some people, but to me, that was a real transformation in how I can show up and be present in group settings, and how I can, kind of disintegrate this need to always be the center of attention, because it's fine sometimes, but it was also probably really limited my ability to connect with people in other times. And so that's an example of what I would call doing the work, is taking a knowledge of something and then actually implementing it in your life, even when it's maybe uncomfortable or doesn't feel as good, because that's where the suffering, and that's a small amount of suffering, but comes to a deeper connection to your true self.
So interestingly, and I don't encourage it all the time, but we can sort of draw, I would call dotted lines between types and certain pathologies, right?
Yes.
So you could say ones, if you wanted to, are sort of at their unhealthiest, obsessive compulsive personality disorders, and 2s were histrionic personality disorders, and 4s were borderlines, and 5s were schizotypal, and I could go on and on and on, right?
What are
but
7s?
Course, narcissists.
Yeah. Okay. Totally. Yeah.
And everyone goes, no, it's the 3s, the narcissists. And I'm like, no, it's the 7, because the 7 really does have this need to be at this not only at the center of attention, the storyteller, the entertainer, the person who is kind of bringing the sparkle everywhere.
Yes.
Like the pixie dust.
Yeah. Well, and then that also creates what I learned, and this is an example of the storytelling and the ski lift again, is I think I did that because of the pattern and the need to feel comfortable, but also at some point, if you are successful as a 7, you almost feel responsible to bring the sparkle and the storytelling. Like I, in a sense, felt felt almost a need to share my Tom story because I knew that they would be excited that they heard it from the founder and they would tell their friends. And it's a really interesting thing because I think that, and so I would say it was a little bit, part of it was narcissistic, but part of it was also like, I think that sevens and other sevens I know, we do feel kind of like a responsibility to entertain our host or make sure that everyone is having a really great time. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not saying you are a narcissist. We all are somewhere on the narcissistic continuum. Everybody's somewhere on the obsessive compulsive continuum. Everybody is somewhere on the borderline continuum. But narcissists do tend to be a little bit more florid. They tend to, if here's dead center, they're just a little bit maybe higher on a scale, somewhere up around here. And one of the things I want to encourage people to remember, and this is true for all types, that when a person is doing their work, it distresses people around them because you are interrupting the circuit of behavior that they have grown used to for as long as they've known you, right?
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, well, are you depressed today? How come you're not talking as much? How come you're not as funny? How come you're not as this? Did you experience that from resistance from people at all?
In some ways, yes, but I also feel this is one of the great blessings of my life is that I have a really solid group of it's actually about 12 guys that we go on this big trip together every year. We're on like a daily text chain together. Like we are truly brothers in every sense of the word, even though we're not related through blood. And they have gotten to know that as much as of an enthusiast as I am, that probably what has defined me as much as that over the last few years is this word of being a seeker. And so they have been able to see that when I'm not playing out the traditional patterns and roles of the seven that they have gotten to know, that they appreciate, in a sense, the courage or the experimentation to do the work and to be different. So I really haven't had much resistance at all. And then, and I would say some of the people that are the closest to me, they actually are the ones that, not even knowing anything about the Enneagram, have regularly encouraged me to be more present, be more still, really, slow down. And the best one of all is my 5.5-year-old. He, about a year ago, he said, "Dad, you're always rushing. You're always looking for the next thing to do." And I was like, whoa.
Wow.
That is like exactly the work that I'm working on. And it really, I think, encouraged me to even take some of the wisdom from the Enneagram even that much more seriously. If a 5-year-old can pick up on it without ever knowing about the Enneagram in the book, then there's deep, deep truth in there.
One of the things that I've thought about, we've assigned descriptors, or actually the word would be signifiers, right, to each of the types. And they really don't mean anything. Different teachers use different signifiers. Sometimes, for example, sevens are called the epicures. They're not even called the enthusiasts,
Mm-hmm.
Ones are called the perfectionists, but I've sort of changed their name to the improvers. Twos are called the helpers, but I've now started to call them the befrienders. And I do it when I think they're healthy. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're not so healthy, you're the helper. But when you're really doing great, you're the befriender. Yeah. So when you're not very healthy, you're the enthusiast. Are you now saying to me that when you're in a good space, you're the seeker?
I definitely think so. Yeah. I like that a lot. That feels right to me. Yeah.
So maybe I have to sit down and do this for all 9 numbers. Like when you're not in a great space, this is what you're called.
Yeah.
And this is, when you've kind of transitioned into a place of awareness, of presence, of self-observation, developing an inner witness who can say, uh-oh, I'm moving in the wrong direction, that has a different signifier. I recognize the limitations of labels and how they can sometimes be pathologizing in some way, but they are a little helpful in some way.
Oh, I think they're so helpful. And I think that the way that I have told people that when you really know that you've nailed your number and that the Enneagram has the potential to really do some transformative work is when the label that has been assigned to you, that when you hear it, you really don't want to get rid of it. So like, I still love that I'm the enthusiast. So even though that's where I am when I'm not in my highest state, it's really hard for me to see that as a negative still, because so much of my identity in my life and my joy at a certain level has come from climbing mountains, surfing big waves, entering in highly charged romantic relationships. I mean, whatever you can label it. And so it's taken time to really start looking at that and say, yeah, that was level one of the video game. And that was a great level and it was fun. And I always will remember that level, but I'm going to get bored if I just play this level. So in some ways, it's actually, I just thought of this. This is why I love podcasts, is I feel like they're like therapy sessions. So I just had a realization that I don't think I've ever had, because I just said it. I, as a 7, are afraid of boredom. But what's beautiful is now I see that continuing on in the pattern of the enthusiast could actually be boring. So it's, so acting out as the enthusiast and doing all these activities and wanting more and always needing the third glass of wine instead of being content with the first or the second, just living that way autonomously actually feels kind of boring to me now, because seeking and transforming and living with moderation and purposely creating constraint in my life seems so much more exciting. And that's when I know that this work is really kind of taking hold inside me.
It's one of my closest friends is a 7, and he really is a Wall Street legend. I can't say his name because it's actually quite well known, but he is one of the most 7 human beings I have ever met in my entire life.
Yeah.
And one time he said to me, and I say this because you were mentioning romantic relationships, and I want 7s to hear this. He said to me one time, he said, knowing the Enneagram, he said, I realized looking back that I actually didn't love, he's had several wives. He said, I actually didn't love my first wife. I was just in love with the idea of being in love.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, it was like as if love were a fascinating new idea.
Yes.
As a 7,
an experience.
It was a new experience, and it was fascinating. And of course, it wasn't conscious, but he confused the experience with the person.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Or tried to just fit a person into the experience he wanted to have, and if that person willingly went into that, that makes a lot of sense.
So let's take a turn for a second.
Sure.
People tend to stereotype 7s as, air quotes, the fun people. Right?
Yeah.
But there's and I, by the way, have a 7 son. You remind me very much of him. He's 22 years old, and the two of you, if I put the two of you in the same room, I'm afraid of what might happen to the universe. But you are sort of stereotyped as the fun people, but there's a serious, even very dark side to 7s that doesn't get talked about very much, right? And I'm just curious how the dark side manifests itself in you, if in fact it does.
I wouldn't use the word dark, but in opposite of being the fun person, I think what manifests in me is the real need for like stillness and contemplation. And so while and maybe earlier in my growth, would be seen by my friends as the person that always organized the party or the adventure or whatever. Now I think what they're seeing me is that when I get the group together, I want to take it kind of deep and heavy in a way that actually makes people uncomfortable pretty quickly. Or, that I will talk about things that are, potentially taboo at a dinner party now versus just wanting to talk about bullshit and, have fun. And so I think that's part of me understanding that I am kind of maturing and even moving more towards a 5 maybe, where I'm much more interested in kind of, I wouldn't use the word dark, but deep and real and hard conversations than I used to be. And that goes back to the question about avoiding pain. If I kind of really am in a good place and have kind of breathed a little bit and calmed my nervous system, I actually really enjoy a hard conversation. And this is happening now that, I have an ex-wife who I'm very, very close with, and, we're co-parenting week on, week off with the kids. We live in the same town. We're both starting to date other people now. Like, there's some hard conversations that are happening. And before, I think I really would have wanted to avoid those or get through those quickly or rush the conversation. And now I actually kind of savor it in maybe a kind of a dark way, because I know that there's so much growth and real relationship that's being built by being willing to feel some pain, feel some insecurity of her or myself, feel the perspective of the other person, where before, I think as a 7, I would just try to, manipulate or argue or, rush through the conversation so that I could just get through it as fast as possible. And now I'm actually willing to really sit in it. And I think that's part of that, maybe using the word dark, but I would just say more seriousness of me. I'm okay that that's not going to be a fun conversation, but yet I still might look forward to it.
I'm fairly certain this is true, but the Latin etymology of the word suffer means to allow.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so I think what 7s struggle with when they're not mature, when they're unevolved, when they're unskillful, is they struggle to allow suffering, conversations, suffering experiences. But it is curious to me, for example, with my son. My son loves classical music, and he loves sound scores to films, like like scores.
Sure.
And one of the things that he loves to do is listen to very sad, melancholy scores. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he just gets off on it, and you think that he'd want to be listening to like old cuts of Wham.
Yeah, sure.
But instead he's listening to Elgar's Nimrod. You know what I mean? Like,
interesting.
It's very curious for a 7, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hold on 1 second. That was supposed to be waking me from a nap yesterday. Apparently, it was going to be a 24-hour nap.
Wow. So, nothing happens by chance. So this is, I think, great for any 7s out there listening. So I doubt there are very many 7s that have ever taken a nap, because taking a nap or even sleeping 9 hours a day seems like you're missing out on something, right? And so I have found, just in the last couple of years, the absolute, almost divine experience of napping.
Yes.
And
wow.
And it's like, this is like doing the work. Like, actually, when I go on vacation now, I will try to take a nap every single day, even if there's the greatest surf in the world or all my friends are playing beach volleyball. And I mean, people, think it's crazy. They're like, you're going to take a 2-hour nap and we're like in Tahiti? And I'm like, yes, like, you can take a nap anywhere. And I'm like, I know, and I should. And it's just this amazing thing. And so I think there's some real experiences that 7s can do. So I'll say the other 2 that I have found that'd be really fascinating is fasting. doing like a 5-day, I love to do like what I call a fasting mimicking diet, where I only consume about 800 calories. It's usually about like an avocado, some spinach, and a few macadamia nuts for the entire day. And doing that for 5 days and feeling what it's like to not get more, and then to see that your body my body comes alive in a beautiful way through fasting. And that constraint is something that I actually, going back to like this dark place, I like to look forward to fasting now. I do it 3 to 4 times a year. And then the other thing is if you are a drinker, but drinking you don't associate as like a problem, is actually doing sobriety challenges. So I do 30 days of full sobriety 2 or 3 times a year now. And I always don't want to do it. I'm always like pissed at myself for telling all my friends I was going to do it. Last October, I did this whole Sober October on Instagram and got like thousands of people to do it with me. And then I was like pissed at myself on day 3. But by day 10, I was like, I feel amazing. This is great. And so what I would say is find opportunities to force constraint and moderation in your life. And it will always be something you don't feel comfortable with, but a day or 2 into whatever it is, you're gonna just your soul just lights up. And so those are 3 things that I found are incredible practices that I would say all sevens could benefit from.
Well, you've given sevens a tremendous amount to think about, and now we're going to have a conversation about something that I'm really fascinating in.
Okay.
In part because I've done a lot of reading about it, and it's something that it actually fascinates me from a therapeutic standpoint, but not necessarily one that's not from a spiritual standpoint. And that is that you're funding the Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research at Johns Hopkins University.
Yes.
And I want to know where that idea emerged from.
Sure. Well, the idea really emerged from a couple of, I guess, a confluence of events in my life. So one of the events in my life was I was going through a challenging time back in 2016, 17. I had sold half of TOMS. I stepped down as CEO. We had our first child. I was feeling a little bit rudderless in terms of my purpose. I wasn't working, as much as I used to. And I just kind of, for the first time in my life, felt a little bit depressed. And I was kind of trying to figure out a way to snap out of it. And I did not want to go on antidepressants. There's something inside of me just didn't feel like I wanted to sign up for something that potentially I could become dependent on. And so a friend of mine said, have you ever, tried any psychedelics? Specifically psilocybin and ayahuasca. And I said, no, I've never done drugs in my life. And they said, well, we don't really call them drugs. We call them medicines. And if done in the right therapeutic setting, they can be incredibly helpful in kind of opening up people and getting them out of a potential funk. And so I went down to South America in Peru, and I did ayahuasca. And it was a incredibly powerful experience for me. I mean, I've always had a deep faith in God and connection to Jesus. But this took it to a level that no reading Richard Rohr ever could do. It was truly transformative. Now, I want to say for listeners who are listening really quick, I would not recommend your first experience to be ayahuasca. There are many other smaller steps to take. I would start with going to South America and doing psilocybin, which is also known as magic mushrooms, in a therapeutic setting. And you might never even need to get to ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is like, having knee surgery when all you really needed was physical therapy. So I always want to say that, but I did have a great experience. And then that opened my just curiosity, my seeker in me, to want to understand how this could be helpful to people. And that led to watching a bunch of documentaries, reading a bunch of books, really connecting with my dear friend, Tim Ferriss, because I remembered him talking about this. And so we had some long dinners and talked about his experiences. And ultimately it was Tim that said, hey, like, as a philanthropist and as someone who wants to address some of the mental health challenges in our country, there is, in Tim's words, a historic opportunity to be a part of a few different donors to potentially move this to the place where it becomes legal in the United States in the therapeutic setting. And they can help people with a host of issues, from the opioid crisis to depression to, end of life fear, and anxiety and stress. And so I saw it as a incredible opportunity to put philanthropic dollars on something that was truly cutting edge. Now, also at the same time, and this has led to my new company that I launched in March, which is called Madefor, is I also found that a psychedelic experience, while it can be transformative, is very hard to integrate long-term into your life. And so beyond having that experience, I started meeting with a neuroscientist at Stanford named Andrew Huberman. And Andrew Huberman really opened me up to this idea that there are ways to change our state of our brain from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And specifically, the best ways that he has seen that happen was through the adoption of new positive habits and practices from a physical and mental perspective. And so I ended up then going on this journey, which was 2 years long and beautiful, where I met with top scientists from Harvard, Stanford, all these universities that were studying these, what I would call keystone habits, that the people who are, reported as flourishing and really thriving the most in society do a lot of. And during that process, I also met my business partner, Pat Dossett, who was a Navy SEAL for 9 years. And after being a Navy SEAL, he really developed a fascination of taking some of the amazing training and access to habits and practices that the SEALs got to, kind of everyday people, because he really has this huge heart of gold and wanted to help eliminate a lot of the self-inflicted suffering that we experience just living in this modern age. And so what was so fascinating is, and I love talking about this, because my suffering, my, kind of diagnosis with mild depression led to two of the most profound experiences of my life. One, having an experience with psychedelics, which then led to me becoming a major donor both in Johns Hopkins and the MAPS organization, which I think is going to have a huge impact on, these real, challenges that we have in our country. And then the second thing, on the total end of the spectrum, led me to really, from a scientific standpoint, understand how basic habits and practices, when taught in a very different way than we've tried to learn them, can actually be sustained and change people's lives, which led to the company Madefor that I'm spending all my time on now. So it goes back to this theme we talked about, that suffering can bring so much transformation, creativity, etc., into our lives.
And I'm assuming that people can find out about Madefor.com.
It's actually, I wanted to buy that domain, but we could only get Madefor.com. So GET Madefor.com.
Check it out. All right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, man. I've really enjoyed it. It's brought me a lot of joy and a sense of vitality and sort of it's actually the word I guess I would give is renewal, to the day. And so I really would like to thank you for that, and for all that you've done, for all that you're doing, and more importantly, for all that you're becoming.
Well, thank you, Ian. I was really looking forward to this podcast because I knew it would be very different than some of the other ones I've done. But I think as I went out to get a glass of water, told one of my colleagues, I was like, this is the most fun I've had in a podcast in a long time. Because I think I'm actually learning more from the hosts than they're learning about me. So I appreciate the time that you've given me and how some things clicked during this hour together that will continue me on my path. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I hope you'll come on again. I trust that in a year from now, we'll have an entirely different conversation with all new kinds of material to talk about.
For sure.
Typology listeners, once again, we love you. We're grateful for you. We're thankful that you have chosen to come on this journey of self-discovery with us. And remember the words of the great Oscar Wilde, be yourself, everybody else is already taken. Until next time.